Paul Dillett is one of those names that, the moment you hear it, instantly hits any bodybuilding fan. His physique was absolutely colossal, almost impossible to compare to anyone else in the sport's history. He was tall, insanely wide, with muscles that seemed to go beyond anything people were used to seeing in the 1990s. He wasn't just big, he was visually intimidating, almost unreal. That's why the nicknames came so naturally. Freak Einstein wasn't an exaggeration. It was people trying to explain something that didn't seem like it should even exist. Jurassic Paul pushed that idea even further, giving the sense that he came from a different era, like a dinosaur walking among humans. Whenever he stepped on stage, all eyes automatically locked onto him. In an era dominated by Dorian Yates, the ultimate symbol of the mass monster age, Paul Dillett was seen by many as a real threat to the throne. His sheer size, muscle density, and outrageous genetics made a lot of people believe he could be the man to change the future of the Mr. Olympia. Paul Dillett was born on April 12, 1965, in Montreal, Canada, into a cultural mix that would shape his personality early on. With a French father and a Jamaican mother, he grew up in an environment where discipline, hard work, and a strong sense of identity were part of everyday life. Long before bodybuilding was even on his radar, sports already played a central role in his life. His first major spotlight came through football, where he played in the Canadian Football League, the CFL. Even back then, Paul stood out for his massive frame, raw strength, and rare athleticism for someone his height. On the field, he learned something that would stay with him forever: how to compete under pressure. It was through football that he got his first serious exposure to weight training. At the beginning, lifting had nothing to do with aesthetics. It was simply a tool to get stronger, more explosive, and more durable against opponents. But something started happening to Paul's body, and it happened fast. While other athletes progressed gradually, Dillett seemed to grow at a completely different pace. Muscle came on quickly, his overall size exploded, and his body's response to training was almost immediate. His elite genetics began to reveal themselves, and what started as a supplement to football became curiosity, then obsession. Over time, football faded into the background. The obsession with iron, mirrors, and physical evolution took over. Bodybuilding went from an option to a destiny. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, something had permanently shifted in Paul's life. Weight training stopped being just a sports tool and became the center of his routine. He was no longer training to be a better football player. He was training to grow, to evolve, and to push the limits of his own body. His inspirations came from bodybuilding giants: Gary Stridham, with his massive delts; Tom Platz, with his legendary legs; and Lou Ferrigno, the ultimate symbol of size and visual impact. Paul openly admired them and shaped much of his physique by studying these idols, especially when it came to building wide shoulders and an imposing overall structure. What really stood out, though, was the speed of his progress. While many athletes needed years to show noticeable changes, Dillett seemed to evolve month after month. His muscular response was insane, almost instant, feeding his obsession with training and physical development even more. The intensity was extreme. Paul later talked about periods when he trained every single day with no rest, driven purely by the desire to improve. The gym became his refuge, his laboratory, and at the same time, his personal battlefield. Every session was treated like a test of limits. Before long, the decision was made. Bodybuilding stopped being a distant possibility and became a one-way path. Paul's competitive bodybuilding debut came in 1991 at the North American Championships, one of the most important events for anyone chasing pro status. Even as a relative newcomer, he stepped on stage in the heavyweight class and immediately turned heads. With a massive physique, still raw in certain details, but impossible to ignore, Paul secured second place in the heavyweight division. For many people in the audience, it was clear that this wasn't just another promising athlete, but someone who could make a real impact at the professional level. The 1991 result wasn't an ending, it was fuel. Paul went back to the gym even more obsessed, determined to fix weaknesses, add more size, and refine his physique. In just 1 year, his body seemed to make an almost unbelievable leap in size and muscle density. In 1992, he returned to the very same stage, and the result was absolutely crushing. Dillett won the heavyweight class and then went on to take the overall title, beating every other champion that night. That victory left no doubt about it. He was ready for the next level. With that win, Paul earned the highly coveted IFBB Pro card. In record time, he went from a promising newcomer to an elite professional. Paul's pro debut came in 1993, and it was anything but quiet. Unlike many athletes who ease into the pro ranks through smaller shows, he jumped straight onto the biggest stages in the world, facing the absolute elite of bodybuilding right out of the gate. At the 1993 Arnold Classic, Paul placed fourth, drawing attention not just for his size, but for the sheer visual impact he had on stage. Shortly after, he repeated that same fourth-place finish at the Ironman Pro Invitational, proving that his Arnold showing wasn't a fluke. That same year brought the ultimate test, the Mr. Olympia. In his very first appearance, Dillett finished in sixth place. An incredible result for a rookie at a competition notorious for punishing even the smallest mistakes. Right there, he made it clear he wasn't just showing up. He was there to compete. Throughout the 1990s, Paul found himself sharing the stage with some of the greatest names in bodybuilding history. He went head-to-head with Dorian Yates, the ultimate symbol of the mass monster era, along with Sean Ray, Kevin Levrone, Ronnie Coleman, and Flex Wheeler, an absolutely insane generation of talent. And here's a question for you. Was this the most talented generation bodybuilding has ever seen? Drop your answer in the comments. Just being among those names didn't guarantee wins, but it said a lot. Dillett was part of one of the most competitive lineups bodybuilding has ever witnessed. When we talk about Paul Dillett, we're not just talking about raw size. We're talking about proportion on a body that was extremely tall by bodybuilding standards. At around 6 feet 2 inches tall, or about 1.88 meters, he already faced a natural disadvantage in a sport dominated by shorter, more compact athletes. Even so, his numbers were completely off the charts. On stage, Dillett competed at roughly 285 to 290 pounds, which is around 129 to 132 kilograms. For someone his height, maintaining that kind of weight with visible conditioning immediately set him apart. In the off-season, things got even more extreme. Paul reportedly weighed between 320 and 330 pounds, about 145 to 150 kilograms, turning his physique into something almost unbelievable in person. He wasn't just big, he was dense, wide, and visually dominant from every angle. His arms measured around 23 inches, roughly 58 centimeters, while his chest reached an incredible 60 inches, or about 152 centimeters. Those numbers helped cement the image of an athlete who looked bigger than any known reference point at the time. All of this explains why Paul Dillett went down in history as one of the largest physiques ever seen on a professional bodybuilding stage. But not everything in Paul's career came easily, and the year 1994 would mark his life forever. During the Arnold Classic, one of the most important competitions in the world, he stepped on stage chasing what, at the time, had become almost a collective obsession, maximum definition, no matter the cost. To achieve that ultra-dry look, Paul ended up overusing diuretics, a practice that was common in the 1990s but extremely dangerous. The result was severe dehydration. Visually, he looked incredible, but internally his body was already showing clear signs of collapse. Then, during the posing routine, something terrifying happened. His muscles began to cramp violently, and Paul essentially froze on stage. His arms locked overhead, and he couldn't move or bring them down, visibly trapped by his own body as the situation unfolded in front of a stunned audience. He had to be escorted off the stage by officials. Even after trying to return a few minutes later, the same thing happened again. The gigantic physique that had stunned the crowd moments earlier was now being carried backstage, where Paul received urgent medical attention. The scene shocked fans, athletes, and judges all over the world. From that day on, Paul Dillett's collapse became a historic moment, a clear warning about the extreme risks of dehydration in bodybuilding. The 1994 Arnold Classic incident left deep marks on Paul Dillett's career. Even though it didn't end his journey, that episode followed his name forever, influencing both how the public viewed him and how judges and experts analyzed his performances. Despite his outrageous genetics and unprecedented size, one criticism kept coming up over the years. Paul never fully mastered the art of posing. His poses were impressive in terms of sheer mass, but they often lacked flow, polished transitions, and total control of the stage, elements that are essential at the highest level of bodybuilding. Many experts believe this detail was decisive. In a sport where millimeters and seconds can make all the difference, Dillett's physique wasn't always presented in the best possible way. It wasn't a lack of muscle, but a lack of technical refinement, and that cost him higher placings at critical moments. Still, it's important to keep things in perspective. At the 1994 Mr. Olympia, just a few months after his collapse at the Arnold Classic, Paul Dillett finished in 4th place, beating numerous elite competitors. That result stands as one of the best placements of his entire career on the sport's biggest stage. That raises an interesting question. If he could reach that level even with technical limitations, how far could Paul Dillett have gone if he had combined his monstrous physique with perfect posing? The true peak of Paul Dillett's career came in 1999, when he won the IFBB Night of Champions, a victory many consider the most important title of his professional career. That win confirmed what fans had believed for years. When everything clicked, Dillett was capable of beating anyone on stage. Beyond that title, his career was filled with strong results at top-tier competitions. Paul racked up multiple runner-up finishes at European Grand Prix events and at the Ironman Pro Invitational, consistently placing himself among the most respected athletes on the pro circuit. At the Mr. Olympia, even without ever taking home the trophy, Dillett secured several top 5 finishes, something very few athletes manage, especially in an era as brutally competitive as the 1990s. Between 1996 and 2006, Paul maintained an intense competition schedule. He entered dozens of shows around the world, frequently making finals and staying consistently among the elite of professional bodybuilding. At his peak, Paul took training to a level few were willing to endure. He trained twice a day, with long, brutal sessions, always prioritizing the major muscle groups. There was no such thing as a light workout. Every trip to the gym had one clear purpose: to grow. His training split focused on specific muscle groups, allowing extreme attention to each area of the body. Shoulders, back, legs, and chest were hit with massive volume, long sets, and heavy loads, pushing the full hypertrophy potential his genetics allowed. Progressive overload was taken very seriously. Paul believed that if the weight wasn't increasing or the stimulus wasn't more intense, the body had no reason to adapt or grow. Even though he was known for his insane size, Dillett never neglected cardio. He performed aerobic exercise daily, often fasted first thing in the morning, aiming to improve conditioning and help control body fat levels during contest prep. At the same time, Paul understood that growth also requires recovery. He alternated stretches of several consecutive training days with planned rest periods, adjusting his routine based on how his body responded. When it came to nutrition, Paul Dillett was always straightforward and practical. Despite his massive physique, his diet wasn't complicated or filled with secrets. For him, growth came from daily consistency, not from magic formulas or trendy nutrition fads. The foundation of his diet was simple and repetitive: chicken, rice, eggs, fish, and red meat. These were easy-to-find foods, easy to prepare, and highly efficient at delivering large amounts of protein and energy. Paul believed that overcomplicating nutrition only got in the way of focus. Alongside solid meals, he relied heavily on protein shakes, mainly to help cover his daily nutrient intake. Shakes made it much easier to hit the massive calorie requirements needed to maintain a body weighing over 300 pounds, around 140 kilos, during the off-season, something very few athletes can sustain with solid food alone. When it came to supplements, the mindset was the same: basics done right. Whey protein was a constant, while multivitamins, fish oil, and thermogenic supplements were used more strategically during contest prep, when tighter control became essential. Paul Dillett's competitive career came to an end gradually. His final competition took place in 2006 at the Montreal Pro, but his official retirement from the stage was only announced years later, in 2012. It wasn't an abrupt exit, but the natural closing of an intense chapter filled with highs, lows, and historic moments. After years of pushing his body to the absolute limit, Paul realized it was time to turn the page. Competitive bodybuilding demanded more and more sacrifice, and he chose to channel his experience and vision into something different. but still deeply connected to the sport that shaped his life. Even before officially retiring, the signs of this new direction were already there. In 2007, he founded the World Beauty Fitness and Fashion, better known as the WBFF, a federation created to break away from the traditional standards of professional bodybuilding. The WBFF's concept was innovative. It wasn't just about judging muscle mass or extreme conditioning, but also stage presence, aesthetics, charisma, and marketability. Athletes had to impress as a complete package, not only with their physique, but with how they presented themselves. With that, Paul Dillett entered a new phase of his life, now as an entrepreneur and a visionary within the sport. Even after leaving the competitive stage, Paul never stepped away from the bodybuilding world. Beyond the WBFF, he invested in several areas, including supplements, fitness-related businesses, and real estate, building a solid financial foundation over the years. Through these ventures, Dillett accumulated an estimated net worth of around $2 million, proving that his vision went far beyond muscle and the spotlight. He successfully leveraged the fame he built in the 1990s to remain relevant and financially stable after his competitive career ended. Today, Paul lives in Toronto, Canada, far from the glare of competition lights, but fully focused on his business projects. His presence in the sport is quieter now, yet still influential, especially through the WBFF and his image as an icon of a defining era. Paul Dillett's legacy remains incredibly strong in bodybuilding. He became a symbol of extreme genetics, someone who seemed to push past the natural limits of the human body and redefine what size meant on professional stages. Paul Dillett wasn't just another name in bodybuilding history. He was the physical limit of the mass monster era, living proof of how far human genetics could go when combined with obsession, discipline, and extreme choices. His story blends glory, real risks, and moments that permanently changed the sport. Even without ever winning a Mr. Olympia title, Paul earned his place in history as one of the most impressive physiques to ever step on a professional stage. An athlete who intimidated with size, stunned with visual impact, and at the same time left powerful lessons about the cost of pushing the body beyond its limits. Dillett's story makes us think, in bodybuilding, and maybe in life, it's not just the biggest who win, but those who can balance talent, technique, intelligence, and health. A trophy doesn't always define a legacy, and very few athletes prove that as clearly as he did. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Paul Dillett was held back by the era he competed in? Or do you believe bodybuilding has always demanded too high a price from those who try to push the impossible? Drop your opinion in the comments. It really matters to the channel. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. It helps keep this kind of content alive. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and if you want to support us even more, consider becoming a member. And don't leave just yet. Another amazing video about a bodybuilding legend is already popping up on the end screen. Click it now and keep going on this journey through the greatest stories this sport has ever seen. I'll see you there.